Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story, everyone. Rain hammered against the tall windows of Ashbourne Manor like angry fists, each drop echoing through the ballroom where Massachusetts elite had gathered for the annual charity gala. Eliza Harper moved through the opulent space with rehearsed precision, her sapphire dress swaying as she adjusted floral arrangements and checked the lighting one last time. After 3 years organizing high society events, she knew every detail mattered, especially when Victor Langston was involved. She hadn't seen him tonight yet, but his presence was already felt, like a shadow hanging over the event. Guests whispered his name with a mixture of reverence and caution, as if speaking too loudly might summon him prematurely. Eliza knew that feeling. The electric tension that preceded the arrival of Massachusetts' most feared and respected man. The scent of white roses and French champagne perfumed the air, but there was something else, a restless energy that made the hair on her arms stand on end. She adjusted the last crystal candelabra when the sound of firm footsteps on Italian marble cut through the string quartet's soft music. "Miss Harper," the deep, controlled voice, made her spin around instantly. There he was, Victor Langston, in all his intimidating magnificence, wearing a black tuxedo that seemed tailored specifically to highlight every line of his athletic body. His dark blue eyes, cold as tempered steel, locked onto hers with an intensity that made her heart race against her will. "Mr. Langston," she replied, forcing her voice to sound professional while her fingers clutched the clipboard against her chest. "Everything is exactly as requested. The auction will begin at 9. And the canapés. You changed the main table arrangement." It wasn't a question. It was a cold statement that cut her words in half. Eliza felt blood rush to her cheeks. "Yes, I thought it would look more elegant with. I didn't ask what you thought." He stepped forward, invading her personal space. The masculine cologne, cedarwood, and something indefinably dangerous wrapped around her like a trap. "I asked why you altered my specific instructions." Irritation grew in her chest, like a flame fed by oxygen. For 3 years, she had endured his arrogance, his cutting commands, his way of treating people like pieces on a chessboard. But tonight, under the pressure of the year's most important event, and with the storm echoing her own inner turbulence, something inside her snapped. "Because," she said, letting the clipboard fall to the floor with a crack that made some nearby guests look in their direction. "For once in your privileged life, Mr. Langston, you could trust that someone knows what they're doing." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the string quartet seemed to lower their volume, as if the music itself was afraid to interrupt the moment. Victor's eyes narrowed dangerously, and she saw a muscle in his jaw twitch. "Say that again," he said, his voice low but charged with veiled threat. Eliza knew she should back down, knew she should apologize, lower her head, and return to her place. But the frustration of years of disrespect and condescension boiled in her veins like hot wine. "You heard me perfectly." She stepped forward, completely eliminating the distance between them. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, see the small raindrops that still glistened in his dark hair. "I'm not your personal employee, Mr. Langston. I'm a professional hired to do a job, and I know how to do it better than anyone in this city." His eyes blazed with something that wasn't just anger. It was something more primitive, more dangerous. "You have no idea who you're talking to." "Yes, I do." Her hand moved before her rational mind could stop it, reaching out and grabbing the Italian leather belt that cinched his narrow waist. The gesture was so unexpected, so bold, that she herself was shocked for a moment. "I'm talking to a man who hides behind money and power because he's afraid of being just human." The world seemed to stop. The sound of rain, the whispered conversations, even her own breathing, everything disappeared in the intensity of the moment. Her hand remained firm on his belt, her fingers brushing the warm fabric of his shirt, and she could feel the muscles of his abdomen contract under her touch. Victor gasped, a low guttural sound that came from somewhere deep in his chest. His eyes widened for a split second, revealing a vulnerability he quickly tried to mask, but it was too late. She had seen it, had felt the way his body reacted to her touch, the way his carefully constructed defenses cracked like ice under the sun. "Woman," he whispered, his voice low and dangerous. "You're going to lead me straight to sin." The words hung between them, like both a confession and a threat. Eliza felt her own body respond, her pulse quickening, her skin tingling where his eyes touched her. It was as if an electric current had established itself between them, raw and impossible to ignore. She should let go of the belt, should step away, should remember that she was in public, that their careers were at stake, that this was exactly the kind of moment that destroyed carefully built lives, but she couldn't move. Maybe, she whispered back, surprising herself with the audacity in her own voice. That's exactly where you need to go. For a moment that felt like eternity, they remained like that, connected by a thread of tension so palpable that anyone watching could see it. Then, as if suddenly remembering where they were, Victor stepped back, breaking the contact. But his eyes remained fixed on her, burning with an intensity that promised this was far from over. "This event ends at midnight," he said, his voice controlled again, but with an undercurrent of something dangerous. "You'll stay? We have matters to resolve." It wasn't a request, and as Eliza watched him walk away, moving through the crowd like an elegant predator, she knew she had crossed a line from which there would be no return. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one that had just unleashed between them. The gala continued around them, as if nothing had happened. But Eliza felt every fiber of her being vibrating with the memory of that touch. Her hands trembled slightly as she bent to pick up the clipboard she had dropped, and when she straightened, Victor had already disappeared into the crowd of tuxedos and evening gowns. But she could still feel him. It was as if a part of him had stuck to her skin, a physical memory that made her conscious of every movement, every breath. The echo of his voice, "You're going to lead me straight to sin," reverberated in her mind like a dangerous mantra. "Elisa," Clara's soft voice brought her back to reality. "Is everything okay? You look different." "I'm fine," Eliza lied, forcing a professional smile while checking her list. "Is the auction still on schedule?" Clara nodded, but her eyes remained concerned. "Yes, but are you sure you're okay? I saw you talking to Mr. Langston. And it was just work." Eliza cut her off, sharper than she intended. The truth was, she had no idea how to classify what had happened. Work definitely wasn't the right word for that explosion of sexual tension and emotional confrontation. She forced herself to focus on the next 2 hours, checking every detail of the charity auction, making sure the waiters circulated with champagne, and supervising the presentation of items. But at every corner she turned, every shadow that moved in her peripheral vision, she expected to see him, and when she finally did, her heart nearly stopped. Victor was leaning against the main staircase banister, a glass of single malt whiskey in his hands, instead of the champagne everyone else was drinking. But it wasn't the drink that made her freeze. It was his eyes, fixed on her with laser intensity, that made her feel like she was being dissected and studied at the same time. He didn't approach, didn't say a word, just watched. Throughout the entire auction presentation, Eliza felt that burning gaze on her back. When she turned to check the bids, he was still there. When she adjusted the auctioneer's microphone, his eyes still followed her. It was like being stalked by an elegant predator who had decided to play with his prey before striking. The tension was suffocating. "The next item," announced the auctioneer in his theatrical voice, "is a week on a private yacht in the Greek islands, graciously donated by Mr. Victor Langston." Applause echoed through the ballroom, but Eliza barely heard it, because at that moment Victor began descending the staircase, each step deliberate and predatory. His eyes never left her, and she felt her mouth go dry as he approached the makeshift stage where she stood. "We'll start at $50,000, the auctioneer continued, oblivious to the electric tension growing between the two. "Do we have 50? 60? Victor stopped just 10 feet from her, close enough that she could see the way his fingers gripped the crystal glass, the way his jaw tightened with each bid that was announced. But he wasn't paying attention to the auction. He was studying her every reaction. When a blonde woman in a red dress bid $100,000, Eliza saw something darken in Victor's eyes. When an older man countered with $120,000, his eyebrows furrowed almost imperceptibly. It was as if he was reading her expressions like a book, searching for what? $200,000, shouted a familiar voice. Eliza turned, surprised, to see Ethan Caldwell, a young heir she had met at previous events, waving enthusiastically. He winked at her with a smug smile, and she felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. That's when it happened. A low sound, almost a growl, escaped from Victor's throat. So low that only she, in their close proximity, could hear it. But it was enough to make every nerve ending in her body light up in alert. She looked at him, and what she saw in his eyes made her forget how to breathe. Jealousy, pure, primitive, and completely irrational jealousy burning in those dark blue depths. $200,000 going once. The auctioneer chanted, "Sanshua-meyen." Victor's voice cut through the air like a blade, cold and final. A murmur of surprise swept through the crowd. Ethan Caldwell frowned, clearly frustrated at being outbid so easily. But Victor wasn't looking at him. He was looking at Eliza, and in his eyes was a clear message. Mine. The arrogance should have irritated her, should have made her explode again. Instead, she felt a wave of liquid heat spread through her belly, a primitive recognition that scared her with its intensity. $300,000 going once, going twice. Sold to Mr. Langston. Applause erupted again, but Eliza barely registered it because Victor was moving toward her, and this time there was no crowd to hide in, no social protocol to protect her. He stopped so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the small lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and difficult decisions. "Do you have something against sea travel?" he asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. What?" Eliza blinked, confused. "The expression on your face when Caldwell made his bid," he explained. Taking another step closer, it looked like concern. His perception left her speechless. He had read her expression of discomfort with Ethan's attention, as if it were a language he mastered perfectly. "It wasn't concern," she whispered, forcing herself to maintain eye contact. "It was just professionalism." His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Liar." The word hung between them, like both a caress and an accusation. Eliza felt her pulse quicken, her breathing become shallow. It was as if he could see through all her defenses, straight to the part of her that had responded to his jealousy with treacherous satisfaction. "Mr. Langston," she began, trying to regain some control over the situation. "Victor," he corrected, his voice firm. "After what happened 2 hours ago, I think we can drop the formalities." The reminder of that moment, her hand on his belt, the guttural sound he had made, the way the world had stopped made her knees weak. "That was a mistake," she whispered. "Was it?" He raised his hand, and for a moment she thought he was going to touch her. Instead, his fingers hovered millimeters from her cheek, so close she could feel the heat from his skin. "Because from where I was standing, it seemed like the most honest thing that happened in this room all night." The honesty of the statement hit her like a punch to the stomach. Because he was right. Amid all the polished fakeness and calculated smiles of high society, that moment of raw fury and desire had been brutally real. "Eliza," his voice was almost a whisper now, and the sound of her name on his lips made something contract low in her belly. "You know you can't pretend this didn't happen." She wanted to argue, wanted to find her earlier fury and use it as armor, but all she could feel was his magnetic intensity pulling her closer, like a gravitational force she couldn't resist. "I don't know what you want me to say," she admitted, hating how vulnerable her voice sounded. "I don't want you to say anything." His eyes dropped to her lips for a split second before returning to hers. "Not yet." The weight of unspoken words hung between them, dangerous promises, seductive threats, the certainty that this was just beginning. Then, as if a spell had been broken, Victor stepped back. "Midnight." "Eliza," he said, returning to his mask of cold control. "Don't make me come looking for you." And with that, he walked away, leaving her standing there in the middle of the ballroom with her heart beating erratically and the terrible certainty that, no matter what happened at midnight, nothing in her life would ever be the same. Midnight arrived like a sentence. Eliza watched the last guests say their goodbyes, their laughter echoing through the marble corridors as they were escorted to their luxury cars. The rain had diminished to a persistent drizzle, but dark clouds still dominated the sky, blocking any trace of moon or stars. She should have left with them, should have made an excuse, grabbed her purse, and run to the safety of her small apartment in Cambridge. Instead, she found herself standing at the entrance of the empty ballroom, hands nervously clasped in front of her, waiting. "I thought you might have run away." The voice came from the shadows near the main staircase. Victor emerged from the darkness, like an elegant apparition, having traded his formal tuxedo for a white shirt, with the first 2 buttons open, and dark tailored pants. Without the tie, without the jacket, he seemed less like an intimidating businessman, and more human, dangerously human. "I still might," Eliza replied, lifting her chin in defiance, even though her voice betrayed a slight tremor. "You might." He began descending the steps slowly, each movement calculated. "But you won't." The certainty in his voice irritated and excited her in equal measure. "How can you be so sure?" Victor stopped at the base of the staircase, maintaining a respectful but tension-charged distance. "Because you're like me, Eliza. You can't leave things unfinished." It was an uncomfortably accurate assessment. She had always been obsessed with completing projects, solving problems, not leaving loose ends. It was one of the reasons she was so good at her job. But there was something more to this situation. A dangerous curiosity about what was growing between them. "What do you want from me?" she asked directly. "Honesty," he replied without hesitation. "Something I rarely find in this world. And you think I can give you that?" His eyes narrowed slightly, studying her. "You already have. When you confronted me tonight, when you didn't bow down like everyone else does, when you grabbed my belt as if you had every right in the world to touch me." The reminder made her cheeks flush, but she didn't look away. That was a moment of weakness. It was a moment of strength. He took a step forward, and I want to understand why. The intensity in his voice made her swallow hard. There was something more behind his words. A carefully hidden vulnerability she didn't expect to find in a man like Victor Langston. "You don't know me," she said softly. "No," he agreed, "but I want to." The silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant sound of rain against the windows. Eliza looked around the empty ballroom with its imposing columns and elaborate frescoes, and suddenly felt very small in that grand space. "Why here?" she asked. "Why not just fire me and end this?" Something dark passed through his eyes. "Because I can't." The raw admission surprised her. There was a brutal honesty in those 3 words that dismantled some of her defenses. "Victor, come with me," he said suddenly, extending his hand. "There's something I want to show you." Eliza looked at the extended hand as if it were a poisonous snake. Accepting it would be crossing another line. One more decision that would take her deeper into unknown territory. "Where?" "The real manor," he said. "This is just the events wing. My house is a mile from here." The idea of being alone with him in his private home made her pulse race for reasons she didn't want to examine too closely. "I don't think that's a good idea." "It probably isn't," he agreed, but his hand remained extended. "Do it anyway." It was a command disguised as a request, and they both knew it. But there was something in his eyes, a carefully contained vulnerability, that made her take the step forward and accept his hand. The touch was electric. His fingers closed around hers with possessive firmness that sent waves of heat up her arm. For a moment, they just stood there, exploring the sensation of skin against skin without the barrier of gloves or the heat of the earlier moment. "Let's go," he said, his voice slightly husky. They exited through the manor's side door into a heated garage, where an impressive collection of cars was arranged like works of art. Victor guided her to a black Aston Martin that looked like it had come straight out of a James Bond movie. The ride was short, but intense. Eliza was hyper-aware of everything. The way Victor's hands moved on the steering wheel, the masculine cologne that filled the confined space, the sound of his breathing in the charged silence. Neither spoke, but the tension was so thick she could have cut it with a knife. When they passed through wrought iron gates and up a winding road lined with ancient oaks, Eliza felt her heart race even faster. In the distance, a Georgian-style manor rose against the stormy sky, its illuminated windows looking like golden eyes in the darkness. "Salem," he said when she looked at him questioningly. "It's technically been my home for 10 years, but—" His fingers tightened on the steering wheel. "I've never brought anyone here before." The admission hit her like a punch. "No one? No one who mattered?" He stopped the car in the circular granite driveway and got out to open her door with a gentleman's courtesy. But when he offered his hand to help her out, she hesitated. "Second thoughts?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Many," she admitted. "Good," he said, surprising her. "It means you understand this isn't a game." She accepted his hand and let him help her out of the car. The manor was even more impressive up close. 3 stories of limestone with arched windows and ivy climbing the side walls. It was beautiful, imposing, and completely intimidating. "It's magnificent," she said sincerely. "It's a gilded prison," he replied, his voice laden with a bitterness she didn't expect. "Built by my grandfather to impress people he despised. Inherited by my father, who never had time to appreciate it, and now mine to exist within." There was a deep melancholy in his words that made something contract in her chest. "You talk about it like it's a sentence, isn't it?" He guided her up the marble steps to the double oak doors, 6,000 square feet of elegant loneliness. When the doors opened, Eliza understood what he meant. The entrance hall was stunning. A vaulted ceiling with an elaborate fresco, A curved mahogany staircase that split in two directions, crystal chandeliers that created prisms of golden light, but there was something cold about it all, a lack of personal warmth that made the space feel more like a museum than a home. "How many people live here?" she asked as they walked through the main corridor. "Besides me, 3 domestic staff who come during the day, a groundskeeper who lives on the property, and my personal driver." He stopped in front of double dark wood doors, but at night, when they leave, I'm alone. Completely. The word alone echoed in the empty corridor like a confession. Eliza looked at him, really looked, and saw beyond the mask of control and power. She saw a man who had built walls so high around himself that he could no longer see over them. "Why did you bring me here, Victor?" she asked softly. He opened the library doors, a magnificent room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a crackling fireplace, and leather armchairs that seemed to have decades of stories to tell, but it was to the tall windows that he headed, looking into the darkness beyond the glass. "Because," he said finally, his voice so low she had to move closer to hear, "for the first time in years, someone touched me, and I felt something." The brutal honesty of the confession stole her breath. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands closed into fists behind his back. It was costing him something to admit this. "And that scares you," she said. "It wasn't a question. Terrifies me," he admitted, turning to face her. "Because the last person who made me feel anything," he didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Eliza could see the old pain in his eyes, the emotional scar that still hadn't completely healed. "What did she do?" Eliza asked. Though part of her didn't want to know the answer, the smile he gave her was bitter as quinine. "She showed me that trusting is the fastest way to destroy yourself." And in that moment, standing in Victor Langston's elegant and cold library, Eliza finally understood that she wasn't just playing with fire. She was playing with a man who had already been burned before, and who was desperately afraid of being burned again. The fire in the fireplace crackled softly, creating dancing shadows on the library walls. Eliza remained where she stood, absorbing Victor's confession, feeling the weight of unspoken words that hung between them like thick smoke. The pain in his eyes was palpable, an old wound that still bled when touched. "You don't have to tell me," she said softly, though every fiber of her being wanted to understand what had shaped this complex man before her. "No," he agreed, moving away from the window to approach the bookshelf. His fingers traced the leather spines as if searching for an answer in the yellowed pages. "But maybe I want to." The admission surprised her. There was something vulnerable in the way he said it, as if the very idea of wanting to share something personal was foreign to him. "Her name was Isabella," he began, his voice controlled but laden with underlying tension. "We met at Yale. She was studying international law. I was in the MBA program. She was brilliant, beautiful, ambitious in a way I respected." Eliza sat in one of the leather armchairs, realizing this would be a long and painful story. The fireplace warmed her left side, but she still felt a strange cold spreading through her chest. "We dated for 3 years. I thought—" He stopped, running his hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "I thought we were equals, 2 predators on the same level, building an empire together. What happened?" Victor picked up a bottle of whiskey from a side table and poured 2 shots, offering one to her. Eliza accepted it, noticing how his fingers trembled almost imperceptibly. "I found out she was selling information about my business to my competitors," he said, taking a generous sip. "For 2 whole years, every strategy I shared with her, every move I planned, every vulnerability I showed, she monetized it all." The shock must have shown on Eliza's face because he smiled bitterly. "The most pathetic part? She didn't even need the money. Her father owned half the banks in Austria. She did it because she could, because it was exciting, because I was stupid enough to trust her." "Victor," Eliza began, but he raised his hand. "The worst part wasn't the financial betrayal, it was the recordings." "Recordings?" His eyes closed for a moment, as if he was gathering courage to continue. "Intimate moments, private conversations where I admitted fears, insecurities. She recorded everything and threatened to make it public if I tried to sue her." The horror of the situation hit her like a punch to the stomach. It wasn't just betrayal, it was a complete violation of everything sacred between 2 people who supposedly loved each other. "My God," she whispered. "That was 5 years ago," he continued, approaching the fireplace as if he needed the warmth to go on. "Since then I haven't trusted anyone that way. Haven't allowed anyone to get close enough to have that kind of power over me." Eliza understood now the coldness that emanated from him, The way he kept everyone at a distance. It wasn't arrogance, it was self-preservation. "That's why you're so controlling," she said, finally understanding why every detail has to be exactly as you specify. "Control is safety," he confirmed. "If I control all the variables, no one can surprise me again." "But that must be exhausting," she observed, getting up from the armchair, living always on guard. Always suspecting everyone's motives. "It is," he admitted. He watched her approach, his eyes following her every movement. "Until tonight." "What's different about tonight?" "You." The word came out like a confession torn by force. "You didn't bow when I tried to intimidate you. You weren't impressed by my money or power. And when you touched me." He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. Eliza vividly remembered the moment, the way he had reacted as if her touch had broken something inside him. "When you touched me," he continued, "I felt something I hadn't felt in years, something real." They were closer now, the space between them charged with an electric tension that made the air seem thicker. Eliza could see the small lines around his eyes, the way his breathing had become more shallow. "And that scares you," she said, echoing his earlier words. "Terrifies me," he repeated, his voice harsher, "because I want to trust you. And wanting anything that intensely is dangerous, fatal," he corrected. Eliza felt her heart race. There was something in the way he was looking at her, as if she were a puzzle he was desperate to solve. Without thinking, she took a step forward, closing the distance between them even more. "Maybe," she said softly. "Not every vulnerability is a weakness. Easy to say when you haven't been betrayed by someone who supposedly loved you." The bitterness in his voice made her stop. She could see the pain, still fresh in his eyes, the way he fought between the desire to get closer and the need to protect himself. "You're right," she admitted. "I can't fully understand what you went through, but I can understand loneliness." Something changed in his expression. "How so?" Eliza hesitated, realizing she was about to share something she rarely admitted to herself. "My parents died when I was 16. Car accident. Since then, She swallowed hard. "I built my entire life around the idea of not needing anyone, of being self-sufficient. And did that work? For a while, until tonight, when I realized that maybe being always alone isn't protection. Maybe it's just a different kind of prison." The silence that followed was charged with mutual understanding, two survivors recognizing each other's scars. "Eliza," Victor said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it, "when you grabbed my belt tonight, did you feel it too? That connection?" She could lie, should lie probably, but something in his vulnerability demanded honesty. "I did," she whispered. He took a step forward, and suddenly, they were so close she could see the tiny adolescent acne scars that not even the best men's skincare had been able to completely erase. It was such a human detail, so real, that something melted inside her. "And now," he asked, raising his hand to almost touch her face, "what are you feeling now?" "Fear," she admitted, "and excitement, and something I can't name." "I know the name for it," he said, his fingers finally making contact with her cheek. The touch was so light it barely registered, but it sent waves of heat through her entire body. "It's desire." The word hung between them like a dangerous confession. Eliza felt her knees go weak, her heart beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Victor," she started. "Shh," he whispered, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "Don't say anything we might regret later." But it was too late to back away. His hand on her face, the intensity in his eyes, the way her entire body seemed to be vibrating with an energy she couldn't control. All of it was pulling her closer to a line she wasn't sure she wanted to cross, and then, as if fate had decided for them, their feet tangled in an antique Persian rug. Eliza started to fall backward, her hands flying automatically to steady herself. But instead of finding empty air, she found Victor's solid body as he moved instinctively to catch her. His arms closed around her waist, pulling her against his chest to prevent the fall. For a moment that seemed suspended in time, they stayed like that. She, leaning back, he curved over her, their faces inches apart. The touch wasn't accidental this time. It was necessary, urgent, and completely intentional when neither made a move to pull away. "Eliza," he said, his voice thick with desire. "I know," she whispered back, because there were no words for what was happening between them. Slowly, as if they had all the time in the world, he straightened her up, but his hands remained on her waist, his thumbs tracing small circles through the fabric of her dress. It was an innocent touch, but one that burned like liquid fire. Eliza felt her breathing become irregular, felt a weakness spreading through her body that had nothing to do with the near fall. "We should stop," she said, but her own hands had found their way to his chest, her fingers spreading over the shirt fabric where she could feel the heat of his skin and the accelerated beating of his heart. "We should," he agreed, but instead of pulling away, he leaned closer until his forehead touched hers, and in that moment, with his breath mingling with hers and the world reduced to the tiny space between their bodies, Eliza knew there was no going back. They had crossed the line, and there was no pretending this hadn't happened. 3 days had passed since that night at the manor, 3 days of deafening silence that weighed on Eliza like a storm cloud about to burst. She hadn't heard from Victor since he drove her back to her car that early morning, and his absence was as palpable as his presence had been. Now, standing in front of her bedroom mirror, adjusting the navy blue dress she had chosen for the gala dinner at the Ritz-Carlton in Boston, Eliza tried to convince herself she wasn't dressing to impress him, but the truth was that every choice, from the lipstick color to the subtle perfume, had been made thinking about the possibility of seeing him. Because of course he would be there. Victor Langston never missed events where his presence could influence business or strengthen political connections. And she had accepted Ethan Caldwell's invitation before that night at the manor, when her priorities still made sense. The Ritz's ballroom was filled with Boston's elite, a sea of impeccable tuxedos and couture gowns that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Eliza entered on Ethan's arm, who couldn't hide his pride at being accompanied by a woman who made several heads turn. "You look stunning tonight," Ethan murmured in her ear as they headed to their table. "Every man here is envying me." Eliza smiled politely, but her eyes were already scanning the ballroom, searching for a specific figure among the crowd. When she finally found him, her heart nearly stopped. Victor was leaning against the bar, a glass of whiskey in his hands, talking to 2 men she recognized as senators. But it wasn't the politicians that captured her attention. It was the way he seemed completely at ease, as if he owned that space and everyone else was just a guest in his domain. And then their eyes met across the ballroom. The impact was physical. Eliza felt as if the air had been sucked from her lungs, as if everyone else had disappeared and only the 2 of them remained. Victor didn't smile, didn't wave, didn't even change his expression, but something dark and dangerous passed through his eyes before he deliberately looked away, back to his conversation. The message was clear. "You chose to be here with another man. Now deal with the consequences." "Eliza, are you okay?" Ethan's concerned voice brought her back to the moment. "I'm fine," she lied, forcing a bright smile, just admiring the decoration. But throughout the entire dinner, she was hyper-aware of Victor. He had sat 3 tables ahead, accompanied by a stunning brunette woman in a red dress that seemed to have been painted on her body. Every time Eliza looked in his direction, he was giving his full attention to his companion, laughing at her jokes, leaning in to hear her whispers. And every time that happened, something acidic and unpleasant grew in Eliza's stomach. Jealousy, pure and irrational jealousy that she had no right to feel. "What do you think, Eliza?" She blinked, realizing Ethan had asked a question she hadn't heard. "Sorry, what? I was saying that maybe we could spend a weekend in Cape Cod. My family has a house there, and what a lovely idea," she said automatically. But her attention had already drifted again because Victor was standing up, extending his hand to his companion. They headed to the dance floor, where an orchestra was playing a slow, romantic waltz. Eliza watched as he slid an arm around the woman's waist and pulled her closer. He danced like he did everything, with absolute control and predatory grace, but there was something different in the way he held the brunette woman, too polite, too distant, as if he was going through the motions without really being present. "Would you like to dance?" Ethan asked, following her gaze. "Yes," Eliza replied, a dangerous idea forming in her mind. "I'd love to." On the dance floor, Ethan held her respectfully, maintaining an appropriate distance as they moved to the rhythm of the music. It was pleasant, comfortable, completely safe, and completely boring, especially when she could see Victor just a few meters away, his aristocratic profile highlighted by the soft chandelier lights. It was as if an invisible magnetic field was pulling her toward him. "Ethan," she said suddenly, "would you mind if I were a bit more bold?" He looked at her with surprise and a touch of hope. "What do you have in mind?" Instead of answering, Eliza moved closer, pressing her body against his in a way that was on the edge of appropriate for a public dance floor. She let her hand slide down his back, tilting her head so her lips almost touched his neck. Not because she wanted Ethan, but because she knew Victor was watching and she could feel his eyes on her like a physical caress, could see his jaw tighten when she smiled seductively at Ethan and let her fingers play with the hair at the nape of his neck. Two could play the provocation game. The music changed to something slower, more sensual, and Eliza took the opportunity to intensify her performance. She let her hands explore Ethan's shoulders, bit her lower lip lightly while looking at him through her lashes, laughed in a way she knew was captivating. Ethan was clearly enchanted with the attention, pulling her even closer and whispering something she pretended to find hilarious. But all her senses were tuned to Victor, who had stopped moving completely and was now just holding his partner in place. His eyes fixed on Eliza, with an intensity she could feel across the crowded dance floor. When the music finally ended, Eliza pulled away from Ethan with a dazzling smile. "Thank you. That was invigorating." "For me, too," Ethan said, clearly hoping the night would lead to something more. "Maybe we could. May I steal your partner for the next dance?" The deep, controlled voice cut through Ethan's sentence like a blade. Eliza turned slowly, feigning surprise at seeing Victor standing behind her, elegant and dangerous in his impeccable tuxedo. "Mr. Langston," she said with false cordiality. "What a surprise." "Miss Harper." His eyes were cold as tempered steel, but there was something boiling in the depths that made her skin prickle. "Ethan, you don't mind, do you?" It wasn't really a question. It was a polite but firm statement, the kind that men like Victor made when they wanted something and had no intention of accepting no as an answer. Ethan hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the interruption, but lacking the courage to challenge one of the city's most powerful men. "Of course," he said finally. "One dance." Victor extended his hand to Eliza with the grace of a predator offering a temporary truce. She accepted it, trying to ignore the electric shock that ran up her arm the moment their skin touched. He pulled her to the center of the dance floor without ceremony, one hand positioning itself possessively on her waist, while the other intertwined their fingers. But unlike the respectful distance he had maintained with his previous partner, Victor pulled Eliza against his body without any pretense of propriety. "Interesting display," he murmured in her ear, his voice too low for anyone else to hear. "Very enlightening." "I don't know what you're talking about," Eliza replied, trying to sound indifferent, but her voice came out slightly breathless. "Don't you?" His fingers tightened on her waist, because from where I was standing, it looked very much like a woman trying to provoke jealousy. "And if it was," she challenged, lifting her chin to meet his eyes, "did it work?" The smile he gave her was slow and dangerous, magnificently. The raw admission made her stumble slightly, but he held her firm, taking advantage of the moment of imbalance to pull her even closer. Now she could feel the heat of his body through the layers of fabric, could breathe in his masculine cologne, could see the small golden specks in his blue eyes. 3 days, she whispered, unable to control herself. "What?" 3 days of silence. "I thought you—" "Thought what?" His voice was dangerously low. "That maybe you had changed your mind about us." Victor stopped dancing so abruptly that she almost collided with his chest. His eyes searched hers, and what she saw there made her forget how to breathe. Hunger, pure, primitive hunger that he was fighting to control. "Change my mind?" he repeated, his voice raw. "Eliza, I spent 3 days trying to convince myself that night was a mistake. 3 days trying to return to my life before you showed up and disorganized everything. And did you succeed?" He leaned closer until his lips almost touched her ear. "Seeing you with him tonight, touching him the way you touched me, smiling at him as if, Christ, Eliza, if this is you changing your mind, then I got the message." The raw pain in his voice hit her like a punch to the stomach. "Victor, it's not what?" He pulled back enough to look into her eyes. "It's not you choosing a man who can give you stability instead of someone who can only offer complications? You're being ridiculous." "Am I?" His fingers tightened on hers. "Because I did exactly the same thing. Brought Amelia tonight to prove to myself that you hadn't changed anything." The admission left her speechless. They had spent the last 20 minutes in an elaborate game of jealousy and provocation, both trying to prove points that neither really wanted to prove. "We're ridiculous," she said finally. "Completely," he agreed, "and dangerous to ourselves and everyone around us." The music was ending, but neither made a move to separate. Instead, they remained in the middle of the dance floor, caught in a moment of brutal honesty that was more intimate than any physical touch. "Victor," Eliza whispered. "I know," he replied, as if he could read her thoughts. "I know, but knowing didn't make things easier. It only made it impossible to continue pretending that what was growing between them was something they could control or ignore." And as the last chords of the music echoed through the ballroom, both knew they had reached a point where pretending was no longer an option. A week had passed since the dinner at the Ritz, and Eliza found herself once again at the Salem Manor. This time to coordinate the final preparations for a corporate event. Victor was organizing for international investors. The irony wasn't lost on her. After everything that had happened between them, they were back to a strictly professional relationship, at least on the surface. In reality, every interaction was charged with an electric tension that made the air seem thicker. Victor had been scrupulously polite and distant since she'd arrived that morning, treating her with the same cold courtesy he showed all other vendors. But she caught stolen glances when he thought she wasn't looking, and the way he avoided any accidental physical contact only confirmed that he was as affected as she was. Now, in the late afternoon, with the catering team finishing preparations in the kitchen and florists putting the final touches on arrangements, Eliza found herself alone in Victor's main office, checking final details on her list. The office was a perfect extension of the man, elegant, imposing, and rigorously organized. Bookshelves filled with business texts and biographies stretched from floor to ceiling. A solid mahogany desk dominated the center of the room, and panoramic windows offered a stunning view of the meticulously maintained gardens. Eliza was checking the audio settings for the evening's presentation when a strong wind slammed the office door shut, sending a stack of documents flying from the side table. Sighing, she knelt to gather them, automatically organizing the scattered pages. That's when she saw the name. Isabella Reinhardt. Eliza froze, holding a letter she clearly shouldn't be seeing, but the name of the woman who had betrayed Victor was there in golden letters at the top of elegant letterhead, and she couldn't resist reading a few lines at "Dear Victor, I hope this letter finds you well. I know I have no right to contact you after everything that happened, but certain circumstances have made it necessary. What the hell are you doing?" The icy voice made Eliza jump, dropping the rest of the papers again. She turned to find Victor standing in the doorway, and the expression on his face was absolutely murderous. The door slammed, and the papers flew. "I was just lying." He entered the office like a predator who had found an intruder in his territory. "You were reading my private correspondence." "Not intentionally." Eliza stood quickly, her hands trembling slightly. Her name was there, and you thought you had the right to snoop through my personal life?" His voice was low, controlled, but loaded with an icy fury that made her step back. "Victor, please, let me explain." "Explain what?" He approached her, his blue eyes burning with betrayal. "How you violated my privacy. How you proved I was right not to trust you." The accusation hit her like a physical slap. "That's not fair. It was an accident. It was an invasion." He stopped inches from her, and she could see the old pain mixed with fresh anger in his eyes. Exactly like she used to do, always finding excuses to dig through things that weren't her business. "I'm not her," Eliza exploded, her own frustration finally overflowing. "Don't compare me to a woman who deliberately betrayed you, aren't you?" He laughed, but the sound held no humor whatsoever. "Because from where I'm standing, you just did exactly what she used to do. Invaded my privacy, and now you're trying to justify it. You want to know what I read?" Eliza challenged, tired of being treated like a criminal. 2 lines about her saying she needed to talk to you about certain circumstances. That's it. And if that's enough for you to throw me in the same category as her, then maybe you're the problem here." The silence that followed was deafening. Victor stared at her as if she had just slapped him, his eyes narrowing dangerously. "I'm the problem," he repeated, his voice lethally low. "Yes." Eliza wasn't backing down now. "You're so obsessed with what she did that you see betrayal in every shadow, suspicion in every innocent gesture. This isn't protection, Victor. It's paranoia. Paranoia." He took another step closer, completely invading her personal space. "Paranoia is when your fears are unjustified. Mine are based on real experience. And how long are you going to use that as an excuse?" She shot back. "How long are you going to hide behind that betrayal to avoid any real connection with another person?" "I'm not hiding." "Yes, you are." Eliza jabbed her finger against his chest, too furious to worry about consequences. "You're so terrified of being hurt again that you'd rather stay alone in your cold manner than risk trusting someone. And maybe I'm right," he roared, finally losing control. Maybe loneliness is better than being stabbed in the back by someone you let in. Or maybe, Eliza screamed back, you're so afraid of living that you'd rather exist as a ghost of the person you used to be. The words echoed in the office like gunshots. Both were breathing hard, faces flushed with adrenaline and anger, bodies tense like violin strings about to snap. Get out, Victor said finally, his voice dangerously low. Get out of my house now. Gladly, Eliza replied, her own voice trembling with emotion. But before I go, let me tell you something. Isabella may have broken your trust, but you're letting her win. You're allowing her to steal not just your past, but your future, too. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. And what do you suggest I do? Just forget everything and blindly trust the first person who comes along. Eliza turned back, and this time there were tears in her eyes, tears of frustration, of pain, of loss for something she wasn't even sure existed. No, she said softly, but maybe you could consider that not every woman is her. That maybe, just maybe, some of us are worthy of the chance you're dying of fear to give. With that, she left the office, leaving Victor alone with his demons, and Isabella's letter still scattered on the floor, like evidence of a wound that refused to heal. She made it to her car before the tears really started falling. They weren't tears because he had yelled at her or even because she'd been unfairly accused. They were tears for seeing a man so clearly destroyed by his past that he couldn't envision a different future. And tears because she finally understood that it didn't matter what she felt for him. It didn't matter the connection they had shared or the chemistry that existed between them. As long as Victor allowed Isabella to define all his future relationships, he would never be truly free to love another person, including her. As she drove back to Cambridge under the darkening sky, Eliza made a decision. She would finish the event preparations remotely and then cut all professional ties with Victor Langston. Not because she didn't love him, because she was finally admitting to herself that's exactly what was happening, but because loving him meant recognizing that he wasn't ready to be loved back, and she refused to be another woman he would allow Isabella to destroy, even from a distance. In the silent manner, Victor remained in his office for hours, staring at the letter that had started it all. Isabella was coming back to Boston. She wanted to meet with him, said she had something important to say, and for the first time in 5 years, he didn't care one bit what she had to say, because Eliza's words echoed in his mind like a truth he didn't want to face. He was letting Isabella win. He was allowing her to define not just how he saw the past, but how he faced the future, and in the process, he had just driven away the only person who had managed to make him feel something real since Isabella had destroyed his ability to trust. The irony was bitter. In trying to protect himself from being hurt again, he had just hurt himself more deeply than Isabella ever could, this time by his own hand. 3 days, 72 hours since Eliza had left the Salem Manor with tears in her eyes and cutting words echoing in the air between them. For Victor, every minute had dragged like an eternity, marked by the phantom sound of her footsteps walking away and the persistent echo of her voice, saying truths he wasn't prepared to hear. He was in his office again, the same place where everything had fallen apart, staring at Isabella's letter that still remained on the desk like evidence of his own stupidity. He hadn't opened the envelope, hadn't answered her 3 subsequent calls, because all the words Isabella could say paled in comparison to the emptiness Eliza had left behind. The doorbell rang, cutting through the silence that had become his only companion. Victor didn't move. He knew it wasn't her. Eliza had been too clear in her exit to come back now, but a pathetic part of him still hoped. Mr. Langston, Beatrice's voice, his housekeeper, came through the intercom. Ms. Harper is here. She said she has something to deliver to you. Victor's heart stopped for a moment before racing violently. Send her in. But when the door opened, it wasn't Eliza who entered. It was Clara, her assistant, carrying a file box and wearing a carefully neutral professional expression. Good afternoon, Mr. Langston, Clara said, her voice polite but cold. I came to deliver all materials related to your events and finalize the contractual aspects of our professional relationship. Victor felt something plummet in his stomach. Where's Eliza? Ms. Harper is in Portland, Clara replied, placing the box on the desk. She decided to accept a permanent position there. She thought it best that I handle the final details here. Portland. The word hit Victor like a physical punch. Permanent position? A boutique hotel in Old Port. They offered her the position of corporate events director. Clara paused, and something in her expression softened slightly. She said it was an opportunity she couldn't refuse. But Victor heard what wasn't being said. Eliza hadn't just fled from a job. She had fled from Massachusetts entirely. fled from him. "When does she leave?" he asked, his voice quieter than intended. "She already left, Mr. Langston. Last night." The world seemed to tilt slightly on its axis. She had already gone, had already made her choice and moved on, while he had spent 3 days agonizing over words he couldn't take back and moments he couldn't undo. "There's something else in the box," Clara continued, pulling out a sealed envelope. "She asked me to deliver this personally." Victor took the envelope with fingers that trembled almost imperceptibly. His name was written in Eliza's elegant handwriting, and the paper held the subtle scent of her perfume, that same perfume that now seemed to haunt every corner of his manner. "Thank you," he managed to say. Clara nodded and headed for the door, but stopped at the threshold. "Mr. Langston, for what it's worth, she really cared about you. Whatever happened between you, she wasn't pretending." With that, she left, leaving Victor alone with the envelope he held like it was a bomb about to explode. He waited until he heard Clara's car drive away before opening the letter with trembling fingers. "Victor, I'm not writing to apologize because I did nothing wrong. I'm not writing to try to change your mind about what happened because I know you've already decided who I am based on another person's sins. I'm writing because you deserve to know the truth, even if you don't want to hear it." When I read those 2 lines of Isabella's letter, it wasn't out of malicious curiosity or desire to invade your privacy. It was because I saw the name of the woman who hurt you. And for one stupid moment, I wanted to protect you from her. I wanted to be a shield between you and any additional pain she might cause. But I realized you don't want protection. You want validation for your suspicions. You want reasons not to trust, not to open up, not to risk being hurt again. And I refuse to be the villain in the story you're telling yourself. During these past weeks, I fell in love with pieces of you that you probably don't even know exist, with the way you smile when you think no one is looking, with the kindness you hide behind harsh commands, with the loneliness you carry like armor, even though it's destroying you from the inside. But I can't love someone who's determined to destroy himself. I can't fight ghosts you refuse to exorcise. Take advice from someone who loves you more than she should. Isabella doesn't deserve the power you keep giving her. She doesn't deserve to define every relationship you'll have for the rest of your life. And you don't deserve the prison you've built around your own heart. Maybe someday you'll find the courage to leave the past where it belongs. When that happens, I hope you find someone who's strong enough to wait for you to heal. That person isn't me. Take care of yourself, Victor, and for the first time in your life, be gentle with yourself. Elisa. Victor read the letter 3 times before the words really penetrated. When he finally really understood what she was saying, he felt like he had just woken up from a nightmare that had lasted 5 years. She was right about everything. He had given Isabella power over his life, long after she had left. He had allowed her to define not just how he saw the past, but how he faced the future, and in the process, he had destroyed the only real and genuine thing that had entered his life since then. Victor stood abruptly, knocking over his chair in the process. He needed to go to Portland, needed to find Eliza and say what? That she was right? That he was a coward who had let a woman dead to his current life define all his choices? That he was in love with her and had been too much of a coward to admit it? He was already grabbing his car keys when reality hit him. Eliza didn't want his apologies, didn't want his explanations or promises of change. She had made that clear in the letter. She wanted him to heal, to find a way to make peace with his past before trying to build a future with anyone. And she was right about that, too. Victor let the keys fall onto the desk and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens Eliza had praised that first night. Everything looked different now, colder, emptier, as if the color had been drained from the world when she left it. For the first time in 5 years, Victor forced himself to really think about Isabella, not the pain she had caused or the betrayal she had perpetrated, but the real woman she had been. Manipulative, yes, cruel, definitely, but also small, insecure, someone who had hurt others because she herself was hurt. And he had given that small, broken woman power over every day of the last 5 years of his life, but no more. Victor picked up Isabella's letter from the desk and, without opening it, threw it into the fireplace. He watched the flames consume the paper, transforming her words into ash and smoke, not because he wasn't curious about what she wanted to say, but because he finally understood that it didn't matter. Isabella was part of his past, and he had allowed her to steal too much of his present. He wasn't going to let her steal his future, too. Even if that future didn't include Eliza and he was beginning to accept that it might not, he wasn't going to live the rest of his life as a ghost of himself. That night, for the first time in 5 years, Victor Langston slept without dreaming of betrayal, and woke up determined to discover who he could be when he stopped being defined by who had once hurt him, even if discovering that meant learning to live with the fact that he had lost the only woman who might have been worth risking his heart for again. The price of healing, he was discovering, was sometimes losing the person who had made healing necessary in the first place. 2 months, 63 days. To be exact, not that Victor was counting, except he was, because every morning when he woke up, it was the first thing his mind automatically calculated. 2 months since Eliza had left his life, leaving only a brutal and honest letter and an emptiness that seemed to grow instead of diminish with time. Now he stood at the bar of the Fairmont in Boston, drinking whiskey he couldn't really taste, surrounded by the buzz of another business event that had become an empty routine in his life. The meeting was to present a new joint venture with European investors, the kind of deal that used to energize him, that used to make his blood race with the adrenaline of conquest. Today, he could barely focus on the conversation around him. "Langston, are you hearing a word of what Baxter is saying?" The amused voice of Henry Vaughan, his lawyer and one of the few men who dared to tease him publicly, cut through his distraction. Of course, Victor lied smoothly, forcing his attention back to the robust Frenchman who was explaining the details of a semiconductor factory in Paris. But his mind was elsewhere, at a small boutique hotel in Portland. More specifically, he had resisted the temptation to seek information about Eliza for almost 2 weeks before finally giving in and hiring a discreet investigator not to spy on her. He had learned his lesson about violating people's privacy, but just to know if she was okay. She was more than okay. She was thriving. The hotel had increased its event revenue by 40% in the 2 months she'd been there. She had implemented a series of innovations that were being copied by competing establishments, and she had been mentioned in 3 trade magazine articles as one of the young professionals to watch in the hotel industry. It was exactly what she deserved, and exactly what made her absence from his life even more unbearable. "If you'll excuse me," Victor murmured. Stepping away from the group of businessmen, he needed air, space, anything that wasn't another minute pretending he cared about profit margins and quarterly projections. He had reached the lobby when he saw her. Eliza was standing near the reception desk, wearing a dark gray suit that highlighted her elegant figure and talking animatedly with a tall, brown-haired man. Victor didn't recognize she was smiling, not the polite, professional smile she used at work events, but a genuine, warm smile that lit up her entire face. The impact of seeing her was physical. Victor felt like he had just taken a punch to the stomach, all the air leaving his lungs at once. 2 months of convincing himself he was moving on, 2 months of trying to accept that she had made the right choice in leaving, and it all crumbled the moment he saw her again. She was more beautiful than he remembered. There was a lightness in her movements, a relaxed confidence that didn't exist when she worked for him. It was as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. His weight, probably. Victor should have left, should have returned to the event, finished his business, and headed home without disturbing the peace she had clearly found. Instead, he found himself walking toward her, as if magnetically drawn. She saw him when he was 10 feet away. The smile disappeared from her face, replaced by an expression of shock that quickly transformed into something more cautious. "Victor," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "What a surprise." "Elisa." He stopped at a respectful distance, painfully aware of the man beside her, who was watching them with obvious curiosity. "You look well." It wasn't a question. It was an observation loaded with relief, and something dangerously close to longing. "I am," she confirmed. "And you?" It was a simple question with a complicated answer. He was functional. He was productive. He was living his life in a way that technically qualified as well. But was he well? That was a completely different question. "Surviving," he said honestly. Something passed through her eyes, compassion, perhaps, or recognition. But before she could respond, the man beside her cleared his throat delicately. "Oh," Eliza said, seeming to remember his presence. "Victor, this is Nathan Caldwell." Nathan. Victor Langston. Caldwell. The name echoed in Victor's mind for a moment before he remembered. Ethan Caldwell. The young heir who had taken Eliza to the Ritz. This must be a relative brother, maybe, judging by the similarity in facial structure. "Pleasure to meet you," Nathan said, extending his hand with a genuine smile. "Eliza's told me a lot about you." Told him a lot about him. Victor wondered what version of the story Nathan had heard. Probably an edited version that painted him as the difficult businessman who had made her life in Massachusetts impossible. "I hope most of it was positive," Victor said, shaking the man's hand. "Actually," Nathan said, casting a look at Eliza that Victor couldn't interpret. It was quite enlightening. "Nathan," Eliza said quickly, a clear warning in her voice. "What? You said yourself that he was Nathan." This time her tone left no doubt. He needed to stop talking immediately, but the damage was done. Victor could see the flush rising in Eliza's neck, the way she avoided his gaze. She had talked about him with this man, and from the way Nathan was smiling, it hadn't just been professional complaints. "Well," Nathan said, clearly oblivious to the tension he had created, "I think I'll let you two catch up. Eliza, see you tomorrow for lunch." She nodded, still unable to look directly at Victor. "Of course. Thanks for dinner tonight." Nathan kissed her cheek, in a way that was clearly familiar, waved to Victor, and walked away, leaving them alone in the crowded lobby. The silence stretched between them, charged with 2 months of unspoken words and carefully repressed emotions. "You look happy," Victor said finally. "I am," she replied, and he could hear the truth in her voice. "The job in Portland it's everything I hoped it would be." "And Caldwell?" The question came out before he could stop it, loaded with a jealousy he had no right to feel. Eliza's eyes finally met his, and there was a mixture of exasperation and something that looked dangerously close to tenderness in her expression. "Nathan is a friend," she said softly. "A good friend who's been very patient with me while I adjusted. He wants to be more than a friend." Again, the words escaped before he could censor them, but it was obvious any man within a 15-mile radius of Eliza Harper would want to be more than just her friend. "Maybe," she admitted, "but I'm not ready for that." "Why not?" The question hung between them like a dangerous confession, because they both knew the answer. She could see it in his eyes, just as he could see it in hers. "Victor," she said softly, "what are you doing here?" "Business," he said automatically. "Meeting with European investors." "No. What are you doing here?" She gestured to the space between them. "With me? Right now?" It was a fair question that deserved an honest answer. The problem was, he wasn't sure he could give an honest answer without completely falling apart. "I read your letter," he said finally. "I figured you would. You were right. About everything." Something changed in her expression. Surprise, perhaps, or caution. "Was I? Isabella didn't deserve the power I gave her, and I didn't deserve the prison I built around my own heart." He was quoting her own words back to her, and they both knew it. "And what did you do with that revelation?" "I burned her letter without reading it," he said. "I started therapy. I stopped using her ghost as an excuse not to live my life." Eliza's eyes widened slightly. "You started therapy?" "Twice a week. Dr. Margaret Liu, specialist in relationship trauma." He managed a small, ironic smile. "She says I have significant trust issues and a tendency towards self-sabotage. Apparently, that's not news to anyone except me." For the first time since she'd seen him in the lobby, Eliza smiled, a genuine smile that made something contract painfully in his chest. "How are you feeling?" she asked, and he could hear the genuine concern in her voice. "Like I've been living the last 5 years of my life underwater and finally managed to surface for air," he said honestly. "It's scary, but it's better." They stood in silence for a moment, absorbing the weight of the conversation. "I miss you," Victor said suddenly, the words coming out in a desperate confession. "Every day, every night. I miss everything about you. Your voice, your perfume, the way you raise an eyebrow when you think I'm being ridiculous. Victor, I know I have no right." He continued quickly. "I know you've moved on, that you've built something better without me, but I needed you to know that you changed my life, and that I'm sorry more than you can imagine for wasting the time we had together." Tears glistened in her eyes now, but she didn't speak. "I didn't come here to try to convince you to come back," he said, forcing the words out, even though every fiber of his being screamed otherwise. "I came here because you deserve to know that your words mattered, that they saved me, even if it was too late to save us." A tear rolled down her cheek, and Victor had to clench his fists to resist the urge to wipe it away. "It wasn't too late," Eliza whispered. "It was just too early." And in those 4 words, Victor saw something he hadn't dared hope for. Not forgiveness exactly, but possibility. The faintest suggestion that maybe, just maybe, what had been broken could be repaired. If he was patient enough, if he was strong enough, if he could prove that the man he was becoming was worthy of the woman she had become. "Eliza," he said softly, "when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be waiting." And with that, he walked away, leaving her standing in the Fairmont lobby with tears in her eyes and the first real spark of hope he had felt in 2 months burning in his chest, because for the first time, He wasn't chasing after something he had lost. He was working to become someone worthy of something he might still win. 3 weeks had passed since the encounter at the Fairmont, and Victor hadn't tried to contact Eliza once. New calls, new messages, new appearances in Portland. It was as if he had simply vanished again, leaving only the echo of his words, "I'll be waiting," reverberating in her mind. Eliza tried to convince herself she was relieved. She had built a good life in Portland. A life that didn't depend on complicated men with emotional baggage and self-sabotaging tendencies. But the truth was, she compulsively checked business news, searching for mentions of his name, and her dreams were filled with blue eyes and whispered confessions in hotel lobbies. She was in her office at the hotel, reviewing proposals for a destination wedding, when her assistant, Nora, knocked on the door with a confused expression. "Eliza, there's a reporter from Forbes here. Says she wants to talk to you about Victor Langston." Eliza's blood ran cold. "A reporter? About what?" She didn't say specifically, but mentioned something about you being instrumental in a business decision of his. Nora hesitated. "Do you want me to say you're not available?" "No," Eliza said quickly, her heart beating erratically. "Send her in." The reporter was an elegant woman in her 40s with silver hair pulled into a severe bun and sharp eyes that missed few details. She introduced herself as Laura Kim, no relation to Victor's therapist. She clarified with a dry smile. "Ms. Harper, thank you for seeing me on short notice," Laura said, settling into the offered chair. "I'm doing a story about Victor Langston's surprising decision to withdraw from the Paris Soul project. I understand you had a close working relationship." Eliza felt the world tilt slightly. Paris Soul project. "The semiconductor joint venture," Laura explained. Studying Eliza's reaction, Langston Enterprises had been negotiating for 6 months. It would have been the company's biggest deal this year, estimated at $3 billion. And then yesterday he just walked away. "Walked away?" Eliza repeated, her mind struggling to process the information. "Withdrew completely, told the French investors that his priorities had changed and he couldn't commit to a project that would require relocating to Paris for 18 months. Laura leaned forward. "The financial community is baffled. Victor Langston doesn't walk away from deals, especially not deals of this caliber." Eliza felt her mouth go dry. "And you think I have something to do with it?" "Well," Laura said, consulting her notes, "several sources mentioned you had a professional difference of opinion a few months ago, and there are rumors he was seen at the Fairmont a few weeks ago, where you were staying for an event. I'm trying to understand if your influence might have contributed to this decision." The word influence was pronounced with an implication that made Eliza stiffen. "I had no influence over Mr. Langston's business decisions. We haven't had professional contact in months." "But you did have personal contact." It was a loaded question, and Eliza realized she was navigating dangerous waters. Anything she said could be misinterpreted or used against Victor. "Our relationship was strictly professional," she said firmly. Laura studied her for a long moment, then closed her notepad. "Very well. If you change your mind about having anything to add, here's my card." After the reporter left, Eliza stood in her office, trying to process what she had just heard. Victor had walked away from a $2.3 billion deal, a deal that would require him to move to Paris for 18 months. 18 months away from Massachusetts, away from her. Her hands trembled as she picked up the phone and dialed a number she had memorized but never called. "Langston Enterprises, Mr. Langston's office. This is Eliza Harper. I need to speak with him. It's urgent." There was a pause. "One moment, please." Victor's voice came on the line seconds later, low and cautious. "Eliza, is everything okay?" "The Paris Soul project," she said without preamble. "Is it true you walked away?" Another silence, longer this time. "How did you hear about that?" "A Forbes reporter came to see me. She thinks I have something to do with your decision." "Christ," Victor muttered. "Eliza, I'm sorry. I had no idea they'd come after you. It's not about that." She cut him off. "It's about why you did it, Victor. This deal, you worked on it for months. 6 months, he confirmed, and you just walked away?" "I reconsidered my priorities." "Your priorities?" Eliza's voice was rising, too emotional for her workplace setting. "Victor, you can't throw away your professional life for you," he said. His voice soft, but with an undercurrent of something firm and unwavering. "Because that's exactly what I did." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "Are you in your office?" he asked. "Yes, but I'll be there in 3 hours." "Victor, you don't need to." 3 hours, Eliza." The line went dead. Eliza spent the next 3 hours in a state of controlled panic. She tried to work, tried to focus on proposals and schedules, but her thoughts kept returning to the same question. What had Victor done? When Nora announced his arrival, Eliza felt her stomach churn. She had seen him just 3 weeks before, but somehow he looked different when he entered her office, lighter, perhaps. Or maybe it was just her perception, colored by what she now knew about his decision. "You drove here," she said, stating the obvious. "Flew, actually. Left the jet at Portland International." He sat in the chair across from her desk, and she could see he was tense, prepared for battle. "You want to know about Paris? I want to know why you destroyed your career." "I didn't destroy anything," he said calmly. "I made a choice. A stupid choice. A necessary choice." He leaned forward, his eyes meeting hers. "Eliza, that project would have taken me away from here for 18 months. 18 months living in Paris, building a factory, diving into the kind of work that consumes every waking minute. And that's bad because I just found a reason to want to be here." The simple statement hit her like lightning. "Victor, you told me I wasn't ready to be loved, that I needed to heal before I could be with anyone." His eyes never left hers. "So I started healing. I started therapy, confronted my past, stopped letting Isabella define my future. But part of that healing was realizing I don't want a future that doesn't include you. You can't base multi-billion-dollar business decisions on—" He stood up, walking to the window overlooking Portland Harbor. "Maybe you're right. Maybe it's madness. But for the first time in my adult life, I'm making a decision based on what I want, not what's logically sound or financially advantageous." "And what do you want?" Eliza asked. Though she was afraid of the answer, he turned to face her, and the intensity in his eyes nearly knocked her out of her chair. "I want you. I want a chance to prove I can be the man you deserve. I want to build something real and lasting and honest. Victor," her voice was barely a whisper, "I know you've built a life here. I know you're happy, that you have Nathan and your work and your independence. I'm not asking you to give any of that up." "Then, what are you asking?" He approached her desk, stopping right in front of her. "I'm asking for a chance, a real chance for us. Not based on fear or the past or all the reasons it shouldn't work, but based on the possibility that maybe, just maybe, we can build something better together than anything we have separately." Eliza felt tears sting her eyes. "You walked away from $2, $3 billion. I walked away from 18 months away from you," he corrected. "The money? There will always be other deals. But you—" His eyes softened. "You're irreplaceable. And I already lost you once by being a haunted idiot. I won't lose you again by putting money above what really matters." "What if I say no?" she asked, her voice breaking slightly. "What if I say it's too late, that I've moved on?" "Then I accept that," he said simply, "and I live with the knowledge that at least I tried, that at least once in my life, I chose love over logic, hope over fear." Eliza looked at this man who had entered her life like a force of nature and left it the same way. But now he was back, vulnerable and open in a way she had never seen before, and he was offering not just his heart, but tangible proof that she mattered more to him than any amount of money. It was terrifying. It was wonderful. It was everything she had wanted, and everything she feared wanting. "Victor," she said softly, standing to face him. "Yes?" "Ask me again." Confusion passed through his eyes. "Ask you what?" "What you want." Understanding lit up his features, and he took another step closer until she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "I want you, Eliza Harper," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I want your heart, your mind, your future. I want to wake up with you every morning and fall asleep with you every night. I want to fight with you and make up with you and build something beautiful and chaotic and real. And I want you too," she whispered, the words coming out like a confession torn by force. The relief that passed across Victor's face was so palpable, she almost cried. And then he was moving, his hands coming up to frame her face, his thumbs wiping away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "We have a lot to figure out," she said, placing her hands over his. "Yes," he agreed. "It's going to be complicated. Probably. And you really walked away from $2. $3 billion. Best investment I ever made," he said. And then he was leaning down, and she was rising on her tiptoes, and finally, they stopped fighting the inevitable. 6 months later, Eliza found herself standing on the terrace of the Salem Manor, wrapped in a cashmere coat while watching the first stars appear in the October sky. The view was breathtaking. Gardens bathed in the golden light of sunset, the distant silhouette of the Atlantic Ocean, and a sense of peace she never imagined, finding in this place that had once seemed so cold and intimidating. So much had changed in the past months. She had moved back to Massachusetts not immediately, not hastily, but after weeks of honest conversations and careful planning. She had opened her own event consulting company, using Victor's manor as a base of operations for a growing clientele that included everything from intimate weddings to international corporate conferences. But more important than the professional changes were the personal ones. Victor had continued his therapy religiously, and she had started her own, working through her own issues about abandonment and fear of emotional dependency. They had learned to fight constructively, to communicate without defensive attacks, to trust each other in ways both had thought impossible. It hadn't been easy. There were nights when old patterns resurfaced, when Victor's fear of being betrayed collided with Eliza's need for independence. There were moments when both questioned whether they were forcing something that shouldn't be forced. But there were also mornings when she woke up in his arms and felt completely at home. There were afternoons when they worked side by side in comfortable silence. There were nights when they talked until dawn about dreams and fears and everything in between. "You're thinking too loud again." The familiar voice made her smile, without turning around. She felt Victor approach from behind, his arms closing around her waist as he leaned down to kiss the side of her neck. "Just reflecting," she said, leaning back against the solidity of his chest, "about how we got here, with lots of therapy and some epic fights." He murmured against her skin, making her laugh. "And plenty of wounded pride and painful revelations, and a $2, 3 billion sacrifice. I still can't believe you made." She felt his shoulders shrug, worth every penny. Eliza turned in his arms to face him. Even after all these months, the impact of having him so close still hit her. The way the last rays of sun highlighted the aristocratic lines of his face, how his blue eyes warmed when he looked at her, how the tension he once carried in his shoulders had dissolved into something that looked very much like contentment. "Any regrets?" she asked, because even now, part of her needed the confirmation. "Just one," he said, his hands coming up to frame her face. Her heart skipped. "Which one?" "That it took you so long to grab my belt," he said with a slow smile that made something contract low in her belly. "Victor Langston," she said, laughing and swatting his chest lightly. "You're terrible." "I am, aren't I?" He leaned down until his forehead touched hers. "Lucky, too." "Why?" "Because somehow, against all odds and despite all my efforts to screw it up, the most incredible woman I've ever met decided to love me back." The words still surprised her when he said them like that, so simple, so direct, so completely stripped of the complications that had once made any declaration of love impossible between them. "I love you," she said back, because she never tired of seeing the way his eyes lit up when she said it. "Show me," he murmured, his voice turning husky. "Here? On the terrace, under the stars, where anyone could see us?" There was teasing in his voice, but also something deeper, a celebration of how far they'd come since the days when every touch had to be hidden, every feeling denied. Eliza leaned closer, her lips almost touching his breast. "What if I told you I had a better idea?" "What?" Instead of answering, she reached out and grabbed his belt, the same gesture that had started everything months before. But this time with completely different intent. This time, it wasn't challenge or confrontation. It was invitation. The effect was immediate and devastating. Victor gasped, the same low, guttural sound he had made that first night. But now there was recognition in it. Memory. Promise. "Woman," he said, echoing his words from so long ago, "you're still going to lead me straight to sin." "I'm counting on it," she whispered back, and then he was kissing her, and she was kissing him back, and everything else disappeared. There was no painful past, no fear of the future, nothing except this perfect and imperfect moment where two wounded hearts had finally found their way to each other. The kiss was everything. Their first kisses should have been, not desperate or hurried or loaded with guilt. It was celebration and promise and complete surrender. It was the kiss of two people who had fought for the right to be together and had finally won. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless, faces flushed, hearts beating in unison. "Home," Victor said, a single word loaded with intention. "Home," Elisa agreed, but when he turned to guide her inside, she stopped him. "Victor." "Yes?" "Thank you." "For what?" "For fighting for us, for not giving up when I gave up, for becoming the man you knew you could be." He studied her face in the growing starlight, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. Thank you for teaching me the difference between loneliness and solitude, between fear and caution, between being alone and being at peace. They remained like that for another moment, absorbing the weight of what they had survived and the promise of what was still to come. Then, hands intertwined, they headed inside the manor that was no longer a gilded prison, but a home they had built together, one wounded heart at a time. And in the library, where everything had nearly fallen apart months before, where secrets had been revealed and trust broken, they made new memories, memories of forgiveness and second chances, twined of love that survived the worst of both of them and emerged stronger. Because sometimes the best love stories aren't about perfect people who meet at the perfect moment. Sometimes they're about broken people who choose to heal together, who choose to fight for love, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. And sometimes, just sometimes, a simple touch, a hand on a belt, a moment of courage amid fear can change absolutely everything. Outside, the stars shone over Massachusetts, silent witnesses to two souls who had finally found their way home to each other. In the end, Eliza and Victor discovered that true love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone willing to be imperfect with you, two wounded souls who chose to heal together, who transformed their scars into maps for a better future. Because sometimes a single touch of courage can rewrite entire destinies, and the greatest revolution happens when we decide to stop running from love and start fighting for it. After all, how many of us are living as ghosts of who we could be just because we're afraid of being truly seen?